My papa just died, she whispered. The words didn't feel real, not even to her, though they'd been ringing in her chest since the sun rose. The girl's voice was barely louder than the breeze that rustled through the dry brush around her boots. She stood still, right at the edge of the rancher's corral, the sun behind her casting a long shadow across the dirt. Her hands hung limp at her sides, fingers curled in tight fists like she was trying to hold something inside. The man with his back to her froze mid-motion. He'd been working a worn leather strap into the saddle's flank cinch, tugging with steady, practiced hands. He didn't turn around right away. For a second, all she could hear was the soft grunt of the horse and the creak of old leather. Then his head turned slowly, and he looked at her. He saw a girl, 10, maybe 11, though small for her age. Bare arms, scraped knees, one braid half undone, dust clinging to her cheeks like she'd run through miles of wind and weeds. Her eyes didn't match her voice. The voice was soft, scared, but the eyes, they were hollow. Not crying. Past that point. He didn't say anything, didn't ask her name or where she came from. He just let go of the strap, stepped around the horse, and opened his arms. She didn't move right away. Her boots stayed planted in the dirt like they were tied to something. But after a long second, her feet started forward, slow like her legs weren't sure they'd work. Then in 3 shaky steps, she walked into him. Her face hit the soft flannel of his shirt, and her fingers gripped the cloth like she might fall through the earth if she let go. He wrapped his arms around her without a word, holding her with that quiet kind of strength that doesn't come from muscle. That's when she started shaking. Not crying, still not crying. Just trembling like the grief was cold and it was finally creeping in. He didn't ask anything right then. There'd be time for that. He knew enough to know when a person, big or small, was cracked open. You don't throw questions into a broken heart. The ranch behind them was wide and old, with chipped white fences and a crooked barn roof. Nothing fancy, just solid. The kind of place that felt like it had stories packed into every board. And now this little girl had brought one of her own, something sharp and quiet and heavy. After a while, he pulled back enough to look at her face. Her lips were cracked, her eyes rimmed red, but still dry. "You alone?" he asked gently. She nodded. "He died last night. In the cabin." He blinked slow. "You walked here?" She nodded again. Her mouth twitched like she was trying not to say something. Then, it took all night. His jaw tightened just a little. That cabin, if he was guessing right, was 7 miles up in the hills. The road was barely passable on horseback, let alone on foot. And she'd walked it, in the dark, alone. "I left the door open," she said in a small voice. "I didn't want the wolves to come in. I didn't know what else to do." He closed his eyes for a second. The sun was climbing now, warming the dust, casting long shadows across the paddock. He took her hand. "Let's get you some water." The kitchen was quiet when they stepped inside. The house was simple, wood walls, old iron stove, braided rug in front of the fireplace. He guided her to the table and poured her a cup from the pitcher. She drank it fast, both hands on the glass like water was the only thing keeping her from breaking. When she finished, she looked up at him with a steadiness that didn't match her age. "His name was Silas Brooks," she said. "He wasn't from here. We only came last spring. He was looking for work, but..." Her lips pressed together. "He got sick a few weeks ago. I thought he'd get better." The rancher pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Did anyone know he was sick?" She shook her head. "He didn't want folks to know. Said we'd be sent away. Said people don't help girls with no mamas." Her voice cracked, finally, just a little. "She died when I was 5. The man's fingers curled on the table. He knew how it went. People who lived off the edge of the map, halfway between the mountains and the towns, didn't always reach out when things got bad. Sometimes it was pride, sometimes shame. Sometimes they just didn't believe anyone would come. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elsie," she whispered. He nodded. "I'm Levi." There was a long pause. "Is he still there?" he asked carefully. She nodded. "I covered him with a blanket. I didn't look after that." He let the silence stretch. No child should have had to walk out of a cabin alone like that. No child should have had to cover their father, and leave him behind. The weight of it pressed down hard on the room. After a while, Levi stood. "We'll ride up there this evening," he said gently. "You'll rest first." She didn't argue. She just folded her hands in her lap, quiet and still. Levi watched her, this tiny girl who had just crossed a night alone in the wild because her father died and there was no one else. And even though the ranch had been his quiet place, his escape from people, from war, from everything he'd left behind, he knew this girl couldn't go back to that cabin alone. He wouldn't let her. Not again. The house was still when Levi stepped back into the kitchen with a folded blanket and a bowl of soup. He found Elsie exactly where he'd left her, sitting upright at the table, hands in her lap, eyes fixed on the wooden grain. She hadn't touched anything since the water. Her shoulders were straight, too straight for someone so small. That kind of posture came from surviving too much too early. He set the soup down gently in front of her, not saying a word. She looked at it, then back at him. "You don't have to eat it all," he said. "Just something." After a pause, she picked up the spoon. She ate slowly, careful, like every bite was something she had earned. He didn't press her. She'd talk when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he was staying. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the porch, rattling the barn door, just enough to remind him how far they were from town. 7 miles if you counted the winding path. More like 12 if the weather turned bad. Levi glanced at the clock. It was past noon. There was someone he had to tell. He pulled on his coat and told Elsie he'd be back soon, not far. She didn't ask where he was going. She just gave one nod and returned her gaze to the floor, like she was bracing herself for more silence. Down the road, a half-mile across a wide dirt stretch and behind a leaning fence, lived Eliza Jane. She was Levi's cousin by marriage, a widow for 5 years, and the town's unofficial heart. She helped birth babies, feed the sick, bury the dead. She'd been there when Levi came back from the war and didn't speak to anyone for weeks. If anyone knew what to do with a girl who had lost everything, it was Eliza. He found her in the yard, hanging a line of clothes in the wind. Her gray hair was tied back, sleeves rolled up, the same red apron she'd worn since Levi could remember. When she saw him coming, she lowered the clothespin from her mouth. "You got that look," she said. "Same one you had when you found that mare half dead behind a ridge last spring." "It's a girl this time," he said quietly. "She came to me this morning. Said her papa died last night in a cabin near the ridge. Name was Silas Brooks. I don't know the man. She walked all night to get to my place." Eliza blinked, letting her hands fall to her sides. "How old?" "10. Maybe. And he's still up there?" Levi nodded. "We're riding up at sundown." Eliza didn't hesitate. "I'll come. We'll need to bring something to bury him proper. And food. Poor thing must be starving." "I gave her soup," Levi said. Eliza gave him a look. "You gave her your soup?" He shrugged. "Well, that's a miracle all its own," she muttered, untying the apron and folding it over one arm. "I'll gather what I can." Back at the house, Elsie had fallen asleep with her head on the table, one hand still wrapped around the empty bowl. Levi stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. The way she slept wasn't soft or peaceful. It was the sleep of someone who finally stopped holding up a wall. Her brow was tense, fingers twitching every few minutes like she was still on alert, even in dreams. He didn't wake her. Instead, he stepped back outside and walked to the barn, where his horse, Waylon, stood quietly in his stall. Levi saddled him, slow and steady, letting the animal's breathing settle his own nerves. He didn't talk much to folks, didn't let people in. But this girl, Elsie, had walked through something most grown men couldn't have survived. And she'd ended up on his doorstep. He didn't believe in signs, but it felt like something he couldn't ignore. At dusk, Eliza arrived with a small wagon, 2 spades, a thick blanket, a jar of stew, and a few candles wrapped in cloth. They set out quietly. Levi rode ahead with Elsie tucked close to him, her hands gripping the horn of the saddle. Eliza followed behind with the wagon. The air was cooler up the ridge, and as the sun dipped lower, Shadows stretched long across the hills. The girls said nothing during the ride, but Levi could feel her tensing each time they turned a bend in the trail. Like her body remembered where they were going, even if her voice stayed silent. It was almost dark when they reached the cabin. The place was small, leaning slightly to one side. Smoke hadn't risen from the chimney in days. A broken lantern sat near the front door, glass cracked, wick gone dry. Levi dismounted and helped Elsie down. She didn't move right away, just stood staring at the door. "Do you want to wait outside?" he asked softly. She shook her head and stepped forward. Inside, the air was still, cold. The smell hit first, something heavy and final. But Eliza moved quickly, lighting the candles and covering the body with a fresh sheet from the wagon. Levi helped her lift Silas's frame onto a wooden stretcher. He was a thin man, no older than 40, with deep-set lines in his face that told more story than words ever could. "He kept saying he'd get better," Elsie said from the doorway. Her voice was flat, like she wasn't talking to them at all. "He said he just needed to sleep, but then he started coughing blood. I tried to keep the fire going." Eliza touched her shoulder. "You did more than anyone could have asked of you, sweetheart." The girl flinched slightly at the word sweetheart, but didn't pull away. They buried him just past the tree line, where the ground was soft enough to dig and the wind didn't blow too hard. Eliza read a short verse from memory, and Elsie stood still, holding a stone she'd picked from near the cabin. When it was over, she placed it gently at the head of the grave. "He was a good papa," she said, even when he was tired. Eliza looked away, her eyes glassy in the candlelight. On the way back down the ridge, Elsie fell asleep against Levi's chest. Her body, light and limp, leaned into his coat like it had finally found a place to rest. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring or what kind of future a girl like her had out here, but he knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going back to that cabin. Not ever again. The days that followed were slow and quiet in the way only a wide, empty place can be. Levi's ranch had never been noisy. Just the creak of fences in the wind, the shuffle of hooves, the rustle of grass when the sun got too hot. But now it felt different. Not louder, just fuller, as if the air itself had made space for a new story to take root. Elsie moved through the house like a ghost at first. She kept to herself, didn't speak unless spoken to, and slept curled up in a tight ball under the quilt Levi had set up on the small cot near the stove. She'd barely speak when Eliza came by each day to check in and bring food, though she never turned it down. But something shifted on the third morning, right as the sun slipped past the hilltop and warmed the porch steps. Levi found her outside, sitting on the second step with her knees drawn up to her chest, chin resting on them. She was watching Waylon graze in the field. "You like horses?" Levi asked as he stepped outside, sipping his coffee. She nodded without looking at him. "I used to watch Papa brush the mule we had. Wasn't ours. He was just borrowing it from Mr. Chaffee up in town." "Ever ride one?" She shrugged. "Once. Didn't go far." Levi watched her for a minute. She wasn't afraid, just cautious, like everything around her might fall apart if she touched it too fast. "You want to learn?" he asked. She glanced up at him just for a moment. There was hesitation in her eyes, but also something else. A flicker, the tiniest crack of light. "I guess," she said quietly. And so they began. Each morning after breakfast, Levi would lead Waylon to the small paddock beside the barn. He'd saddle him slow, explaining every strap and buckle, and then lift Elsie up gently onto the saddle. The first time she grabbed the horn, so tight her knuckles went white. She didn't smile, but she didn't cry either. She rode in slow circles while Levi walked beside her, one hand on the reins, the other steady on her boot. Over time, the circles grew wider. Her grip loosened, and then one day, without him realizing, she smiled. It wasn't big, just the corner of her mouth tugging upward, quick and shy. But he saw it. That night, Eliza dropped by with biscuits and a jar of peach preserves. She sat at the table while Levi stirred stew on the stove. Elsie was in the barn, brushing Waylon down with a rhythm that had started to look like muscle memory. She smiled today, Levi said quietly. Eliza looked up, surprised. Truly, he nodded. First time. Eliza's eyes warmed, but her voice stayed cautious. That's good. But keep in mind, Greece a long road. There's no straight walk through it. I know. She's just a child, Eliza added softly. And she's carrying more weight than some grown men ever have to. There's cracks in her she hasn't even noticed yet. Levi nodded, his jaw tight. He hadn't told Eliza about the night terrors, about the way Elsie would wake up some nights gasping, eyes wide, hands clenched in the quilt like she was still somewhere else. She never cried out, just sat there, breathing hard, then lay back down like she didn't want to bother anyone. He hadn't said a word because he didn't know how, but he knew what it looked like. He'd seen in the mirror after the war. Another morning came with gray skies and wind that smelled like coming rain. Levi told Elsie they'd skip the paddock that day, maybe go over some fence repairs together instead. She nodded and grabbed her coat without a word. He handed her a hammer, light in her small hand, and a pouch of nails. They worked side by side in the field, mending a broken slat near the goat pen. Elsie was careful with the hammer, focused. Levi let her work through it on her own until she missed and hit her thumb. She hissed sharply and dropped the hammer. "You okay?" he asked, crouching beside her. She bit her lip hard, cradling her hand. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she turned her face away fast, blinking them back. "I'm fine," she muttered. He didn't push, just held out his hand and waited. After a second, she let him take a look. No blood, but it had bruised. He wiped the dirt away and gently wrapped her thumb with a clean cloth from his pocket. "You don't always have to be tough," he said softly. She looked up at him, and for a moment, her guard wavered. "I do," she whispered. "If I'm not, no one else will be." Levi didn't say anything. He just nodded. He understood that kind of logic, even if it wasn't fair. Later that afternoon, the storm rolled in. Rain tapped the roof steady, and the fire crackled low in the stove. Levi taught Elsie how to shuffle cards, how to stack them into a pyramid and knock them down again. She didn't speak much, but she listened closely. When she accidentally knocked the whole stack over before it was done, she looked like she might apologize. But instead, Levi chuckled. "That's the fun part," he said, tearing it all down and starting over. And to his quiet amazement, she laughed. Just once. A small breath of sound, quick and startled, like it had escaped before she could stop it. That night, she slept through till morning. Days passed, then a week. They fell into a quiet rhythm. Levi would do ranch work. Elsie would help where she could, gathering eggs, fetching wood, learning the difference between feed and seed. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch together, watching the sky turn gold and pink as the sun dipped low over the ridge. She talked more now, not much, but enough. Told him little things. About the doe she once saw drinking from a stream near their cabin. About how her papa used to sing when he thought she was asleep. She never talked about her mother. Levi didn't ask. One morning, he found a drawing folded under his coffee mug. It was rough, pencil on scrap paper. A girl on a horse. A big man standing nearby. The sky drawn with long, wide lines. He looked up to see Elsie pretending not to watch him. "You draw this?" he asked. She shrugged. "I found the pencil in the drawer." "Well, it's real good." She gave a small nod and walked away. But the next day, there was another drawing. This time it was Waylon, all details, his mane, the saddle, even the slight bend in his right leg. Levi stuck both drawings on the wall above the stove. And then came Sunday. Eliza showed up in her best skirt and a small loaf of sweetbread. "Church is meeting up at Mason's clearing," she said. "Small gathering. I thought I'd ask if she wanted to come." Elsie was quiet when Eliza mentioned it. She stood near the window, fingers picking at the hem of her shirt. "I don't have a dress," she said finally. "You don't need one," Eliza smiled. "Just yourself." Levi looked at her. "Only if you want to." After a long pause, she nodded. At the clearing, the people were kind. Quiet. No one asked questions. Eliza sat beside Elsie on the blanket, whispering the hymn lines when the girl didn't know the words. After the last song, someone handed Elsie a small cookie. She took it with both hands like it was something delicate. And for the first time in weeks, Levi saw her among people and not afraid. On the ride back, she asked if she could hold the reins. Levi let her. "I like the singing," she said softly. Papa didn't believe in it, but I think it helps. Levi looked at her, the wind catching her hair as they rode. "It does." That evening, as he walked past her cot, he saw she'd added a third drawing to the wall. This one showed the clearing. People sitting. A girl with long braids in the middle. It didn't look like a ghost town anymore. It looked like home. The calm didn't last. It never does. Not when someone's carrying more grief than their body knows what to do with. The ranch stayed quiet. The sun still rose and fell, and the chores never changed. But something shifted in Elsie. It began with small things. She started waking up earlier than usual before Levi came out of his room. She stopped drawing. The smile she'd started giving, brief but bright, faded like a season turning. Levi noticed. Of course he did. He didn't say anything right away. He gave her space. Watched. Waited. Hoping it was just a phase. But on the 5th day of silence, when she flinched as he reached for a plate near her at breakfast, he knew something had cracked. "You all right, Elsie?" he asked gently, keeping his voice low. She nodded too quickly. He waited. She didn't meet his eyes. Later that afternoon, Eliza came by with fresh bread and dried apples. She sat at the kitchen table while Levi washed up. Elsie lingered by the window, arms crossed tight over her chest, staring out at nothing. "She said anything to you?" Eliza whispered. "No," Levi said. "Stopped talking 3 days ago. Barely eats." Eliza nodded slowly, then rose and walked over to the girl. She crouched beside her, resting one hand on the edge of the table. "Elsie," she said gently, "sometimes the hardest part comes after things settle down." Elsie didn't move, didn't speak. Eliza continued anyway. "You were so busy surviving before, your heart didn't have time to feel all of it. But now it does. That's not weakness, sweetheart. That's just being human." The girl flinched again at sweetheart, the word brushing against something sharp inside her. "I know what happens now," Elsie said finally, voice like a whisper wrapped in wire. "He's gone. I had time to forget that for a bit. But I remembered this morning." Eliza's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, honey?" "I remembered he was dead. Really dead. And it made me mad that I was okay yesterday." The pain in her voice was clear, raw and confused and full of guilt. Levi turned from the sink, drying his hands slowly, watching. "That's grief," Eliza said gently. "It doesn't follow rules. You can smile one day and cry the next. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong." But Elsie shook her head. "I dreamed he was alive. He was singing while fixing the roof. I could hear the hammer, smell the smoke from the fire. Then I woke up, and it was just the wind." She paused, and I hated myself for being happy in the dream. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence sat heavy in the room. Eliza eventually hugged her, and Elsie didn't resist, but she didn't hug back either. The next few days grew harder. Elsie began snapping at small things, when Waylon wouldn't stand still, when Levi asked her to fetch something, when she tripped and scraped her knee. She grew quiet and cold, folding into herself like a turtle pulling into its shell. The little girl who had once laughed softly at card games now stared blankly at the wall. Levi tried to reach her with routine, with patience. But the girl had locked herself away somewhere deep, and she wouldn't or couldn't come back out. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in orange and rust, Levi heard a sound from the barn, a clattering, sudden and sharp. He ran outside, heart thudding, found Elsie standing beside the feed bins, breathing hard. A metal pail lay on its side, grain spilled everywhere. She wasn't looking at the mess. She was looking at her hands. They were shaking. "I didn't mean to drop it," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to. I'll clean it." "It's all right," Levi said, stepping forward. "It happens." But her voice rose, fast, panicked. "No, it doesn't. I never drop things. I'm always careful." He moved closer. Elsie, it's okay. You don't have to. I have to, she cried, backing away. If I don't get everything right, they'll take me. Levi froze. What do you mean? He asked quietly. Her voice cracked. Someone always comes. A sheriff or a man with papers. They say I'm too little, or that I shouldn't be alone. I heard them talking once when Mama died. I was in the next room. They were going to send me off somewhere. And I thought maybe this time, if I just do everything right, you won't want me to leave. Levi's chest ached. She wasn't just grieving, she was bracing, preparing to lose this place, too. I'm not sending you anywhere, he said firmly. You hear me? This is your home now. She shook her head violently. You say that now, but they all do, until someone else knocks on the door. Levi stepped forward and knelt so they were eye to eye. I'm not them, and you're not just passing through. Not to me. Her face crumpled then, not all the way into tears, not yet. But her lips trembled, and the anger drained out of her in a sudden, exhausted slump. I miss him so much, she whispered. Even when he was sick, he'd hum while chopping wood. And I yelled at him the day before he died. I said I hated this place. I told him I wanted to leave. And he coughed so hard he couldn't talk. She closed her eyes tight. I think I killed him with my words. No, Levi said, voice low and firm. You didn't. That's not how it works. People get sick. People die. But words, especially from a hurting kid, they don't cause that. She shook her head, sobbing now. He died alone, and I left him. Levi didn't try to fix it. Didn't tell her to hush. He just pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as her small body shook with grief. You did what you had to do, he said. You walked through the dark to get help. You were brave. You were 10, and you were braver than most grown men I've known. Her sobs slowed. Her fingers gripped the fabric of his coat. They stayed like that until the barn went dark. The next day was cloudy. Neither of them said much. Elsie helped with the goats, then sat on the porch most of the afternoon, watching the sky. Levi kept glancing at her from the corral. He could see the sadness still sitting on her shoulders, but it looked lighter now, like it had somewhere to go besides in. That evening, Eliza stopped by with a letter. Came through the post in town, she said, handing it to Levi. Has the government seal. He took it, opened it, read it quickly. It was from the county. A routine check on orphan children following the winter season. An officer would be stopping by within 2 weeks to verify safety and placement of minors under the age of 16. Levi folded it carefully and didn't say much. But that night, he didn't sleep. He lay awake listening to Elsie's breathing across the room, steady and soft. If they came and saw he hadn't formally adopted her, if they decided she belonged in some faraway institution, they could take her. No matter what promises he'd made. He wouldn't let that happen. He didn't care what papers said. She was his now. And come hell or high water, he'd prove it. The wind howled across the plains the morning the man from the county arrived. Elsie didn't know what was coming. Levi hadn't told her about the letter. He didn't want her to start bracing for a goodbye that might never come. But inside, he'd been living with the weight of it every hour since it arrived. Eliza had helped him gather what paperwork he had. Land records, letters from neighbors, even a Bible verse scribbled by the preacher at Mason's clearing saying the child was in safe, moral care. None of it felt like enough. When the wagon rolled in, Elsie was down at the creek gathering kindling. Levi saw her disappear behind the tall grass as the wheels crunched up the path. The county man was sharp-dressed and dry-eyed, with a folder in his lap and a half-worn pen tucked behind one ear. He didn't bother stepping down at first, just tipped his hat and said, Levi Morgan? I am. Samuel Parks, county placement evaluator. Levi nodded slowly. You're early. Figured I'd make a few stops on the way. Weather's turning rough. Wanted to beat the worst of it. He finally stepped down and dusted his trousers with short, neat flicks of his hand. So, this girl, Elsie Brooks, orphaned February. Father, Silas Brooks. No known family. That right? Yes, Levi said. And she's been living here since? Since the morning after. Parks gave a stiff nod. Well, let's have a look then. They stepped inside the house. Levi had made sure the place was clean, the quilt on Elsie's cot folded neat, the fire warm and steady. The drawings were still up, 3 of them now, quiet witnesses to the life slowly growing between the silence and grief. "You got schooling materials?" Parks asked. "Eliza Jane from down the ridge's been teaching her 2 days a week. I've started her on reading and basic sums. Medical care? She's been seen twice by Doc Marshall. Got the paper in the drawer." Parks wrote something down, flipping through his folder. "Any intent to adopt?" Levi paused. The word sounded like something from a courtroom, something sterile and cold. "She's not a stray dog," Levi said. "She's a child. I care for her like she's mine. I'm not questioning your character, Mr. Morgan, but the law is the law." Levi's jaw tensed. "The law let her walk 7 miles alone the night her father died. I won't let it fail her again." Parks blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness. But before he could answer, the door creaked open. Elsie stepped in, cheeks red from the wind, arms full of kindling. She froze when she saw the stranger. Her eyes snapped to Levi. "It's all right," he said gently. "He's just asking questions. Just doing his job." She didn't relax. She dropped the wood into the basket near the stove and moved to Levi's side like she was waiting for instructions. Parks looked at her, not unkindly, but with the eyes of someone trained to measure, not understand. "How long have you lived here, Elsie?" he asked. She didn't answer. "It's all right," Levi said again quietly. "You can tell him." She swallowed. "A little over a month. Do you like it here?" A pause. "I don't know," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's quiet." Parks wrote something down. "Do you feel safe?" This time her voice was firm. "Yes." He looked at Levi. "She'll need to say more than that in town if it comes to a hearing." "She's a child," Levi snapped. "Not a trained witness." "I understand, Mr. Morgan, but there are procedures." She buried her father with her own 2 hands. "How about you write that in your folder?" The air turned still. Parks sighed, closed his folder. "We'll send word soon." And just like that, he stepped back onto the wagon and rode off into the wind. Elsie didn't say anything until the dust settled behind the wheels. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked. Levi looked at her and saw it. The return of that look he'd worked so hard to erase. The look of someone waiting to be abandoned. "No," he said. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "But do you?" Her voice cracked. "Do they even care what you say?" He knelt beside her. "I care. And I'm going to fight for you. You're not going anywhere." But the worry didn't lift from her eyes. That night, she had another nightmare. Levi heard her cry out, a sound that cut straight through the walls. He rushed to her side. She was thrashing, caught in some awful in-between. When he shook her gently, she bolted upright and stared at him like she didn't recognize him. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're here. You're safe." Her voice came out in gasps. "They said he wasn't dead, that I left him, and he was waiting, and he was cold." She was shaking. "It's not real, Elsie." "I didn't check if he was breathing," she whispered. "I just left. What if he was still breathing?" Levi's heart clenched. He was gone. "Eliza and I saw him, remember? You covered him because you knew. He wouldn't have let you walk away if he could have stopped you. You did the bravest thing a person can do." She broke down then, sobbing hard into his shirt, and this time she didn't hold anything back. All the fear, all the guilt, all the words she'd never said. And he held her. Every sob was a crack in the dam. A crack in the wall she'd built around herself since the day she stood at his fence and whispered that her papa had died. He knew what this was, this moment where the pain breaks through and starts washing everything clean. She cried herself to sleep that night in Levi's arms on the rocking chair near the fire. He didn't move until the sun came up. By morning, something in her had changed. She helped with the chores. She talked more. When Eliza came by that afternoon, Elsie asked if they could bake something together. They made peach biscuits. Eliza winked at Levi behind her flour-covered hands. He smiled, more grateful than he could say. A few days later, a letter came. It was official. The county had reviewed the case and, under local ordinance, would not be removing Elsie from Levi's custody. She could stay, pending proper guardianship documentation, which Levi had already begun filing. He handed the letter to Elsie, and she read the first line 3 times before looking up at him. "I can stay." He smiled. "You're already home." And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't just nod or whisper. She said out loud, "Okay." And she smiled. Not a flicker, not a flash. A full, honest smile. The kind you only give when the storm is finally behind you. Spring came late to the ridge that year, but when it did, it painted everything new. The grass grew in soft and green along the fence line, and the trees behind the barn budded pale with life. The wind no longer howled. It hummed, gentle and warm, brushing past the house like a familiar friend. The hard months had passed, leaving behind something that couldn't quite be called peace, but felt close enough to it. Elsie had grown taller. Not much, just enough for Levi to notice the way her boots no longer dragged on the floor when she sat on the porch swing. She still tied her braid too tight and still flinched when thunder cracked too loud. But she no longer moved like a girl waiting to run. She moved like someone with roots. Each morning, she helped saddle Waylon without being asked. She fed the goats and named the new one Petal. She started humming while she worked, sometimes the tune from church, sometimes something made up on the spot. Levi never interrupted when she did. That humming was her way of filling in the quiet, claiming it. The adoption papers arrived on a Tuesday. Eliza came by with her best dress in a paper bag and cinnamon rolls wrapped in cloth. She watched from the doorway as Levi and Elsie sat at the table, the forms spread out between them. His handwriting was slow and careful, more deliberate than she'd ever seen it. "Do you want to change your name?" Levi asked gently, not looking up from the line he was filling in. Elsie paused. She looked down at the paper, then out the window, then at Levi. "Can I keep Brooks?" she asked. "And add yours too?" His eyes lifted. There was something steady in his voice when he answered. "Course you can." She smiled, that soft, sure smile he'd come to wait for every day. "Then I want to be Elsie Brooks Morgan." Eliza cleared her throat loudly, brushing her eyes with the back of her wrist, muttering something about flower dust. Levi didn't call her on it. The signing was quiet. No ceremony, no visitors, just 3 people in a sunlit room, and a pen that changed everything. After the papers were sealed and Eliza had gone home, Elsie followed Levi outside to the porch. The swing creaked under their weight as they sat together, watching the light dip behind the trees. "Do you think he'd be proud?" she asked after a long silence. "Your papa." She nodded. Levi looked out toward the horizon. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust, and something that always reminded him of his own father. Something old, strong, and impossible to name. "I think he'd be real proud," he said. "He raised a girl who's braver than most folks I've known." Elsie leaned her head on his arm. "Sometimes I still talk to him. In my head." "That's good," Levi said. "Some people never stop." A beat passed. "I don't hear his voice anymore," she whispered. "Not like I used to. I don't think that's bad, but it just means he left space for other voices," Levi said. "For your own." She was quiet, but he could feel her nod against his arm. That night, she asked if she could help make supper. They cooked side by side, nothing fancy, just cornbread and beans, but she stirred the pot like it was something sacred. And when they sat down to eat, she bowed her head and mumbled a short, simple grace. Not for anyone else, just her. After dinner, she pulled a drawing from her satchel. It was newer, the lines stronger, more confident. It showed the 2 of them, her on Waylon's back, Levi standing beside her. Behind them was the house, and above it all, the sky, wide and open. "I want to hang it next to the others," she said. He took it, looked at it for a long time, then nodded. "It's your wall." The next morning was clear and cool, the kind of morning where the sky feels taller than usual. Levi saddled Waylon, and this time didn't hold the reins as Elsie climbed up. "You ready?" he asked. She adjusted her grip, nodded. They rode the ridge trail in silence for a while. The grass swayed gently on either side, and birds skimmed the treetops. Halfway to the clearing, Elsie leaned forward and said, "I want to show you something." She led him down a path he hadn't taken in months, toward the cabin. He tensed at first, unsure, but followed. When they arrived, he saw the place had changed. Not much, but enough to see she'd been there. The old woodpile had been neatly res-tacked. A circle of smooth stones had been placed around the grave. "I come sometimes," she said quietly. "I don't cry. I just sit. I talk. And then I come back." Levi dismounted, walked with her to the stone ring. They stood in silence for a while. "I used to think this place was a curse," she said, voice low. "That it took everything from me." She looked up at him. "But it gave me you." The words were simple, honest. And Levi, who'd lived so long in silence, nodded once, his throat tight. "I'm glad you knocked on my fence." Elsie Brooks Morgan. She smiled. "Me too." They rode back just before the sun touched the tips of the trees. Supper was simple again. The porch swing creaked like always. But everything felt different. There was no more waiting for something to break. No more fear that a knock would come and change everything. The knock had already come. And this time, it had brought something home.